we are recording today, with our usual rules. So today we are very pleased to have with us Sauro Civitillo. Sauro is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany, and he's in the cultural psychology group working on migration and integration. He graduated in 2019, a couple years ago, from the University of Potsdam in Germany with a PhD in education. He has a whole bunch of degrees before that. He has master's degrees in behavioral science and educational sciences from the Netherlands, and a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in clinical psychology from La Sapienza University of Rome. Sauro has received a Global Young Faculty Award from the Mercator Research Center Ruhr, and a fellowship, and you currently have, I think, a fellowship for interdisciplinary educational research from the Jacobs Foundation and Leibniz Education Research Network. He has already, he's graduated 2 years ago, he's already been awarded about 450,000 euros in grant funding. He's published in the top journals of education, including Educational Research Review, Teaching and Teacher Education, and Contemporary Educational Psychology. And he has a swiftly growing body of research that addresses issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the titles of his papers themselves are fascinating, and here are some representatives. Stressing similarities or ignoring differences, shedding light into two different forms of color evasiveness ideology with pre- and in-service teachers. The interplay between culturally responsive teaching, cultural diversity beliefs, and self-reflection. Challenging beliefs about cultural diversity in education, a synthesis and critical review of trainings with pre-service teachers. And in, I think it might be your most recent journal publication, Researching Race Ethnicity in Race-Mute Europe. So we are really interested to hear more about your research. These are topics that have been a particular focus of the Rutgers Graduate School of Education over the last several years. And we're really delighted that you can be here today and are looking forward to your presentation. And the title is Disentangling the Effects of Perceived, Personal, and Group Ethnic Discrimination Among Secondary School Students, the Protective Role of Teacher-Student Relationship Quality and Student-School Climate. I hope I got that title right and didn't mix it up with one of the titles of your articles that I
You did, but no worries.
Oh, I did indeed. So that's one of your titles of your articles. So I did actually mix them up. I'm sorry about that. So
I will present that study, so no worries.
Yeah, I think your title today sort of seemed to span a lot of the titles you've been working on. So we're really looking forward to seeing your work. And now I'm going to, since I don't have your poster up, I'm going to have to ask you to introduce your own title.
Yeah. Okay. So I hope now you see my slides and you hear me well. Yeah, thank you first of all for your kind introduction and invitation. Yeah, so the title of my talk is School-Based Ethnic Discrimination and Teachers' Role. I will give some empirical insights from Germany and beyond. So my talk will consist of two parts. In the first part, I will focus on teachers as potential perpetrator of ethnic discrimination. And in the second part, I will focus more on the protective role of teachers in mitigating the negative effects of ethnic discrimination. Yeah, I will also upload my slides on my Open Science Framework page. So if you're interested then to have a look at that after the talk, I will do that. Okay, so maybe before I start, I also would like to give you some background information about where I do research, where I live, but also do research. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Germany, but yeah, Essen, the city of Essen is basically located around here in one of the largest and most densely populated area in Europe, and also highly diverse. Many ethnicities live here. And yeah, Germany is a very interesting country to do research on ethnic diversity and on discrimination. Why? because it has a very long history of migration. Currently, Germany is the second most popular migration destination in the world after the United States. It has been so since now a couple of decades. Since the beginning of the refugee crisis in 2015, Germany has been hosting millions of refugees, mainly from Syria, who escaped from this endless and horrible conflict, but also people from Afghanistan, Iraq. In addition to that, there are also migration groups who moved already after the Second World War. So basically, now we have about 1/4 of the population has a so-called immigrant background. This is a map of Germany, and again, you see here the proportion of citizens with a migration background. To me, as an Italian, still amazing how sharp is the distinction, is the border between East and West Germany. Still is, because in the East Germany, you have less than 10% of population with an immigrant background. In the West and South is more than 40. If we look at also at city level, all measured cities in Germany, these are the proportion of children with a migration background under the age 6. In all measured cities, it's above 50, except Berlin, although these figures are a bit old, so it might also be different now, meaning that, well, ethnic majority children are not really the majority now anymore. So you may wonder, what do you mean with migration background? And well, this probably is a topic of another talk, so I'm not gonna go too much in detail. We don't ask basically for race and ethnicity in Germany and in Europe. Why? Because, for instance, the word race is a taboo word that was cancelled, was abandoned after the Second World War because of some connections with the Nazi ideology. So this migration background is some sort of replacement, which in my view is highly problematic. But with that, we mean individuals, so German citizens who were born outside of Germany or have at least one of the parents born outside of Germany. Again, why it is problematic? Because it does not really capture the complexity of these individuals. So in this box, basically you see individuals with very, very different lived experiences. And you see migrants from the southern part of Europe, refugees, or people who were here from generations. So it's kind of controversial. Here we have also some papers are open access. We have also a paper under review. If you are interested to learn more about that, yeah, you can access to these papers. But just to give you some ideas on how diverse is our student population, here are some of the papers that I published. In 2017, we had fairly large sample, about 1,600 students, and were students from 55 heritage countries. In a paper that I'm going to present in the second part of this talk, we have over 50 countries represented. And in a recent paper based on data collection that made in Berlin, the capital of Germany, we have also 1,300 students, and we have 105 heritage countries. And so highly diverse, super diverse, I would say. So if you see, our school children is about now 40% with a so-called immigrant background. What about our teachers? Well, here there is clearly a mismatch. It's about 7%. So you see, I mean, you may have similar figures in the United States, I'm not sure. But yeah, in Germany, there is definitely a gap. I'm also going to use the words of a famous multicultural scholar who I had the fortune to meet here in Germany, Geneva Gay. She called it a sociocultural gap of lived experiences between our teachers and our students. differences in terms of migration experiences, differences in terms of cultural values, sometimes of religious beliefs, or language repertoire. Now, let's talk about discrimination. And these pictures were taken in June 2020. The first picture you see on the top, basically some young people, adults, protesting in front of the Brandenburg Tor, which means, yeah, it's door. It's a famous monument in Berlin. Young people protesting in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and despite the COVID-19 restrictions. And here you see a graffiti which appeared on the remaining of the Berlin's wall in Berlin. So after that event, after the brutal death of George Floyd, also in Germany, discrimination and racism somehow became major topics of discussion. Now, the issue is that, well, we have already these things in Germany. So this picture over here is also another graffiti that appear on the wall of a city, Hanau, which is a small town close to Frankfurt, appeared 4 months earlier, the death of George Floyd. Why? These are some faces of the people who were killed by a man who basically shot them just because these were people of color, people with so-called migration background, were shot on the street, in bars. About 2 years ago, similar episode, one man targeted individuals with Turkish heritage. Individuals with Turkish heritage represent the biggest ethnic minority group here in Germany. So also remind to my students sometimes bad things do not just happen in the United States, but we do have also issues with discrimination, racism in Germany, not only in Germany, but across Europe as well. Now, I already talked about racism and discrimination. Also would like to give some definitions, which in my view help. So the first one highlights the well, discrimination can be defined as a differential treatment, so treating someone differently, bringing a disadvantage to a member of an ethnic group. The second definition, I think, is also important because also includes some power dynamics. So racism is not just treating someone differently, but also implies some power issues, some power dynamics. Now, in the school context, there are a variety of day-to-day interaction between adults at school, such as teachers and their students, that involve an imbalance of power. Now, it does not mean that every time that there is an interaction between teacher and students, it's a discriminatory action. Still, schools as an institutions also, you see these power dynamics in schools. So teachers talk in front of the class, students listen. Teachers have also the power to choose which learning materials or teaching strategies to use. Might be also some cross-national differences, but this power imbalance is often present. Now, I will argue that this asymmetric power relationship between teachers and students in a way shapes also the educational opportunities of many of those. In many cases in a positive way, but in many others also in a negative way. Here are some research colleagues here in Germany, also conducted a study myself. We have some empirical evidence that ethnic minority students here in Germany, for instance, receive worse grades, the same assignment, receive less advanced school placement recommendations despite equal performance, also receive harsher disciplinary actions for the same misbehavior. Teachers hold in general lower academic expectations towards ethnic minority students. Again, these findings may be familiar or may sound familiar in the US context, but here is what we have from Germany. Now, why teacher-based discrimination can be harmful for students? I mean, probably, I'm not sure if there are really some theories that may give some straightforward answers, but there are some school developmental models that can help us to better understand the underlying mechanisms. And well, use the integrative model by Garcia Cole and the stage environment fit perspective by Jackie Nichols and colleagues. So basically, when students experience discrimination by teachers, they may feel unsupported and their competence being questioned. Also, students who are discriminated by teachers may believe that they have no control over educational success. So regardless of how hard I try, my educational performance is somehow under control of someone else. Also, students who may perceive discrimination by teachers may also perceive that the school system is rejecting them. So all these needs are important and to be fulfilled in order to somehow also perform well and feel also accepted and belong to school. Okay, so I'm gonna now share some preliminary results of a systematic review and meta-analysis that I have conducted with my colleagues here in Essen. Hopefully the paper will be out soon. So paper is still in preparation, but I think it's also a good moment then to share the results with you. So we focus on the effects of teacher-based racial discrimination on student well-being and academic outcomes. The protocol of this meta-analysis is pre-registered on Prospero. Prospero is this international register of systematic reviews, which is hosted by the National Institute for Health Research in the UK. If you want to have a look at our protocol, you could go on the Prospero website and include that ID number. So now we have overwhelming evidence that discrimination is harmful among adults and youth and adolescents. We know less, however, there is some sort of limitation in our view of existing evidence. Often it's the case that scales contain lumped together experiences of discrimination across different perpetrators. This is a scale, for example, that is often used also among adolescents, was validated with Native Americans. It's quite old, but as I said, it's often used. You see that basically the sources of discrimination is sometimes police, other peers, kids, teachers, sometimes it is not specified. So such instrument, even though it's valuable, but yeah, gives us some idea about general effect of racial ethnic discrimination. And we thought that it's important then to look at more perpetrator-specific sources of discrimination. And so try to really distinguish whether a student perceives discrimination by a teacher or by a peer, for example, might be different. And this may also have differential consequences for these students. We have some evidence of some studies that try to somehow disentangle these different sources. And we know that discrimination from teachers may be related to low academic performance. So these are the review questions. So we first wanted to check the effects of teacher-based discrimination on well-being and academic outcomes. And then we also checked for some possible study and sample characteristics as possible moderators. Okay, some inclusion criteria that we used. We included journal articles, dissertations, master theses. We included studies that were correlational, longitudinal, and also experimental, even though there is none that has an experimental design. We included published as well as unpublished data in the last, basically, 2 decades. In English, of course, but also in German to somehow try to increase the likelihood of having studies conducted outside of the United States. Focused on teacher-based discrimination and on racial ethnic discrimination. And we focus on students that were in from kindergarten to the end of high school. We excluded studies. Unfortunately, we had to exclude about 40 studies in which the correlations were not available. So we contact many researchers who had some items that indeed refer to teacher-based discrimination. We asked them to pull out these items and then run the correlation. But yeah, unfortunately, in many cases was not that possible because they didn't have access to the data anymore, or they, or we basically, after the third reminder, then we lost hope. We did not include studies conducted with college or university students because this is also a very different life stage. And we did not include studies that had items including the word adults in school, because this may be school psychologists may refer to counselors or guards. So we just pick studies that refer to teachers. What we did, we worked with correlations. We used also a multi-level approach. Why is that? Because basically, in many cases, we had, for instance, studies that use the same data set, but presented, for instance, in one study, correlation between teacher-based discrimination and depression. In another paper, with the same participants, correlation between teacher-based discrimination and self-esteem. So the principle of dependency independence of the data was kind of violated. So that's why a multi-level approach. And also because in some cases we had multiple effect sizes within the same study. So for instance, there were correlations between teacher-based discrimination and GPA, academics of concept, and so forth. So this is a little bit more sophisticated way that accounts for when the data are nested. We checked also for homogeneity and for publication bias. I'm going to present some results. So the results are based on 64 studies and over 200 effect sizes. First, I'm going to present the data for well-being and academic outcomes. We basically coded, we had 3 dimensions of well-being: psychological, behavioral, and physical. For instance, some of the variables that we coded, depression, delinquency, somatization. We had about 100 effect sizes for academic outcomes. We first put together GPA and school motivation. So we have a negative correlation of -20 for well-being and a -16 for academic outcomes. These are, I would say, moderate correlations. So you have to think about, so the literature on discrimination and prejudice with -20 is still quite moderate. It's not that small. But what also interesting in my view is that actually, for well-being, it's even more negative than for academic outcomes, showing that, teacher-based discrimination is not just harmful for academic performance, but also for well-being. And we also found evidence for substantial heterogeneity in the effect sizes. Then we basically analyzed separately GPA and school motivation. So GPA, we had grades in English, math, German, for example, both self-reported and or standardized. And for school motivation, some of the indicators that we coded in this category: academics of efficacy, academics of concept, educational aspiration, school engagement. Of course, the number of effect sizes is lower. We have -11 for GPA and -16 for school motivation. What is interesting, if you compare our results with Benner meta-analysis, Benner is a scholar from the University of Austin. She published a meta-analysis on the effects of discrimination among youth and adolescents. I think school motivation was low, or was -10 or so. So now, when we just focus on teacher-based discrimination, we see that correlation is even stronger. And again, also some signs of heterogeneity. Now for school belonging, just be extra careful, because I mean, these are just 13 effect sizes. And again, they are correlations, so we should be extra careful on drawing any strong conclusion. But yeah, we have a -26, which is again a kind of moderate negatively correlation between teacher-based discrimination and school belonging. Okay, so for moderation analysis, we tested some study sample characteristics such as the age of the students, ethnicity, school ethnic composition. Unfortunately, in many cases, some of the moderators, well, it wasn't possible to check for all moderators that we plan to do. Why? Because, for instance, not all studies report school ethnic or school racial ethnic compositions. So we ended up to have, in some cases, too few effect sizes, and then you basically ended up having kind of underpowered analysis. But we also check for study features such as so how many items were used to assess teacher-based discrimination, or the quality of the instrument, whether it was well-established scale, or whether it was a self-devised scale. So these are some of the examples. Again, despite substantial heterogeneity, I can say that only age seems to be kind of influential or meaningful to explain the heterogeneity of the effect sizes. And in this way, so for younger children at this age 9 to 12 years old, the strength of the negative association between teacher-based discrimination and academic outcomes was higher than for middle or late adolescents, meaning that especially this age group seems to be particularly vulnerable to teacher-based discrimination. Now, some issues that, in our view, need further attention. First, we need more research from different countries. Many of these studies were indeed conducted in the United States. We need also longitudinal research, because, again, these are, even though it's a meta-analysis, still based on correlational data. So we need longitudinal research to kind of explore causal links between teacher-based discrimination and well-being and academic adjustment. We also need, in our view, there was not a single study that really mentioned or assessed the effects of microaggressions. So all these studies basically had these skills measuring some sort of open forms of discrimination. But we know that microaggressions are common in the school context. So definitely we could also potentially in the future to assess the effects of microaggressions. Also, in some studies, the items asked students to think about whether they had experienced discrimination by teachers in the last 6 months or in the last 2 years. And in our view, this is an issue because there is some sort of retrospective bias. So, one way to kind of reduce this retrospective bias is to, for instance, use daily diaries, together also with 2 colleagues from the US, Priscilla Lui and Tiffany Hip. We are about to start data collection in which we assess discrimination on a daily basis by using daily diaries. Okay, I think I can go on with the second part of my presentation. Basically, I want to also highlight the protective role of teachers, especially on the teacher-student relationship quality. And in this paper that I will present, it has been published so recently, but still I think it is important to share it. Before I talked about the different sources of discrimination, also rarely the distinction between personal and group discrimination is made in studies. So we assess in this research the distinction between whether discrimination is targeting me or somehow members of my same ethnic group. So we use this hypothesis that is still quite, it has been found quite helpful, that individuals, especially young adolescents, tend to perceive higher discrimination against their ethnic group than against themselves. And again, there are not that many studies also checking for the effects of group discrimination. We also have several studies which focus on the protective factors against discrimination, how they can buffer the negative effects of discrimination. We have studies focusing on the protective role of racial ethnic identity, or coping strategies, peer support, family culture socialization, but we know less about potential protective factors that are present in the school, such as teacher-student relationship quality and school climate. We assess both, so we know that teacher-student relationship quality is important and is often associated with better academic achievement and school adjustment. Why? Because teachers may represent some sort of secondary attachment figures. They provide a secure base and help students to feel connected with the school. However, also negative teacher-student relationship could give somehow the opposite results, could exacerbate negative consequences of discrimination. And we also use the multi-level approach in this case because especially with young adolescents who have just fewer teachers, they may kind of converge in their perceptions of the teacher. We also assess the protective role of school climate. I'm sure you're familiar with this concept, but yeah, basically it refers to shared perceptions of the learning environment. There are several dimensions of school climate. So feeling safe in school, also to the idea of trust on each other. And school climate has been found to be positively related with a variety of educational outcomes, and also some protective function for against discrimination. So in our study, we differentiate between personal and group discrimination. We tested the effects of personal and group discrimination on 3 outcomes, on self-esteem, academic self-concept, and emotional school engagement. We use multi-level approach, and to probe interactions, we used this also rather helpful, in my view, method, regions of significance. The first hypothesis was pretty straightforward. We expected that both personal and group discrimination would correlate negatively with self-esteem, academic self-concept, and emotional school engagement based on, again, previous studies. But we also expected a buffering effect of teacher-student relationship quality and school climate. So when this relationship is weaker, the relationship is weaker when teacher-student relationship is high and school climate is positive. We had about 456 students who self-identified with other culture other than German. So try to avoid this migration background. We asked them, okay, what is your culture and how do you identify with? Data were collected in 12 schools with 40 classes. Some of the examples of the items that we used, this is not school-based discrimination measure, but it's more general. So I have been teased and insulted because of my cultural background, or people from my culture have been threatened or attacked by people with another cultural background. For teacher-student relationship, items such as I have a good relationship with my homeroom teacher, and school climate, student teachers count on each other. Here are some of the results of the regarding the first hypothesis, so just correlations. We see there is strong positive correlation between personal discrimination and group discrimination, and personal discrimination is negatively related with emotional school engagement and self-esteem. Was not the case for group discrimination, so it's a minus, but relations are not significant. Now, if we look at the multi-level models, we see well, different pictures. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with these methods, but try to somehow guide you through. So for emotional school engagement, we found some sort of exacerbating effect of teacher-student relationship. So basically, group discrimination correlates significantly negatively with school engagement if teacher-student relationship is particularly low, is particularly bad. But we also found some sort of buffering effects. So in classrooms with lower teacher-student relationship, perceived personal discrimination is significantly negatively associated with self-esteem. But in classrooms with teacher-student relationship equality above average, perceived discrimination is not significantly correlated with self-esteem anymore. So somehow signaling or highlighting the buffering effects of teacher-student relationship. Some other results, we found no relations between both personal and group discrimination and academic self-concept, also in contrast with previous studies. We found some support for the personal and group discrimination discrepancy. So indeed, our students report higher levels of group discrimination than personal discrimination. However, these are also positively correlated. So they do not tend to deny that they are not discriminated, but they tend to report that other people of their ethnic groups are discriminated. We also found that despite not significant bivirate correlations, group discrimination can have a negative impact when it is checked with other moderators. We also didn't find any protective role of school climate. Although I have to say we use a measure of school climate that is rather general. So it's not measuring diversity climate, but was more a measure about general school climate, basically. One of the conclusions that we made, schools are not just places to learn, but also places that can offer some safe and supportive environment. Finally, I will conclude my presentations. So how do we prepare teachers for anti-racism action? This is a very difficult question. Maybe we could discuss together. In my view, we do have enough evidence from where to start, at least. So I will argue that we should start on working on teacher psychology. That means basically challenging colorblind beliefs and ideologies that are very common in Germany and Europe too. Confront prejudice and deficit views, that these are also still powerful mechanisms that may explain why teachers discriminate against minorities. Foster teacher empathy, which is seen as an important element for building a relationship with our students. Also build relationship with students who do not look like them. Another possibility, again, to cultivate intercultural self-efficacy, so this degree of confidence that I'm able to teach in highly diverse classes, I'm confident to deal with prejudice and stereotypes in class. This variable, intercultural self-efficacy, has been also now introduced in TALIS, which is some sort of the equivalent of PISA. And in a study with Miriam Schwarzenthal and Martin Daumiller, we analyzed TALIS data with 95,000 teachers. And what we saw, just in brief, that, well, teachers who actually attended some professional development about discrimination, prejudice, actually they also feel more intercultural satisfaction. So somehow, yeah, one way to go is also to support our teachers through professional development. I'm also not that naive that the problem is not that we have to fix our teachers. Racism is a structural problem, and we should also work on structural changes. So in my view, also one way would be to try to include and retain more ethnically diverse teachers, at least in Europe, at least in Germany, and also teacher educators. Here at our university, we have extremely heterogeneous group of students, but at the same time, the people who teach these students are, well, mainly people who look like me. And also to redesign teaching initial preparation. When I moved to Germany in 2015, at the University of Potsdam, there was not a single seminar or lecture addressing diversity, prejudice, discrimination, which I also found kind of alarming in a way. Okay, I will conclude here. Thank you for your attention, and look forward for questions, comments, criticisms.
So thank you very much, Sauro. It was a fascinating talk, and a couple comments noticing similarities with US as well. Of course, many of your studies and your reviews came from US studies. So let's, I see Brittany has a question. I have a question, so we'll see who else has questions. Brittany, would you like to start?
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you for the presentation, Dr. Sauro. I was wondering, and I'm really happy at the end you talked about diversifying the teacher education programs, both with in-service teachers and through the actual training of teachers. But I was wondering if you, in Europe and Germany, do they use, have a theoretical framework like critical race theory, or even like Eduardo da Silva's colorblind racism, any of those theories to explain the work? Or is there an equivalent of something like that in Europe that people are using?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Well, the short answer is no. And I think I had the fortune to do my PhD with US scholar, Linda Zhuang. And I think the first time I heard about critical race theory was because of her, and also another PhD student who also is from the US, and she's now back in the US, Ursula Moffitt. So yeah, we don't have such critical theories, unfortunately. And again, as I said also at the beginning, we have these issues with race, ethnicity, that these are some sort of taboo terms. So many people think that if we don't talk about race, racism disappears. That's not true. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Also, when I did my PhD on cultural responsive teaching, again, I don't want to say I was the only one, but yeah, we basically don't have other scholars in Germany working with such vital philosophy of teaching or critical race theories. So yeah.
Thank you. Aaron?
Hey, Test. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Sorry, just having the audio set up. Thanks for the talk. You mentioned in there something that I was curious about related to stuff that I'm trying to work on as well, on issues of sort of motivation and control. You mentioned that one of the concerns is students' sense of control over their own sort of educational outcomes. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think about working with teachers to help them foster that sense of control, and especially in tension with helping them also foster an understanding about things like systemic injustice that do genuinely undercut, educational opportunities for students.
Yeah, I mean that's a tough question. Yeah, I'm not sure, but we know that somehow to perform well, students also need to fulfill, for instance, need for control. So they should be, they should have the idea that they are supported by teachers and not somehow seen as, yeah, that somehow if I feel that my achievement in a way is biased, or yeah, it is under control of someone who has prejudice against me, definitely, yeah, this may have an influence. So I may tend to disengage from school. Why? Because this may be a source of discrimination. So I think it's not, we know, we have enough evidence that these needs are important. These are not, that's in my view, not really well studied in combination with discriminatory experiences. We have, I have a colleague in Belgium, which Ajir Horan, who studied sense of futility. In many cases, in many schools, which are somehow, there are many students with a so-called migration background, teachers as well as students have a higher sense of futility. So basically, they think it's not worth to teach there because these students, yeah, they simply won't learn, or these students are not eager to learn, or they are not, yeah, they have no interest. And this higher level of futility is anyway, in a way, reflected in many views, many deficit views that teachers hold. Especially when you, here in Germany, we also have very separate secondary school system. And in schools, low vocational schools, well, 95% are students with a migration background. You really see and you really perceive this sense of futility, this again, for both sides. So teachers, because they kind of, yeah, have not hope that students will perform well. At the same time, students who perceive that, well, doesn't matter if I work hard because my teachers has anyway some prejudice, some bad ideas about me. So yeah, well, how to kind of foster, or how to yeah, challenge these ideas with teachers, it's definitely, it's an ongoing work, right? So, and my last slide was the idea that we have to also rethink teacher educational preparation, and not just to offer one seminar or one coursework. We have to do it in a more systematic way, if we really want to prepare well our teachers. But yeah, I'm not sure if I answered to your question. I think it is a tough question, and I'm not sure how to kind of try to challenge these views.
Rishi.
Hey, thanks so much for your talk. One of the things I was wondering about, and so I really appreciate what you're sharing, and I think a lot of us can relate with what you're saying, right? That like positive relationships within the teacher-student power dynamic, they can really shield us, or we talk about community protection for minoritized communities in terms of achieving whatever we want to achieve, right? Given the context. And I've like whether it's in North America or, I've done some work in India too, we find these similar themes, right? That we have to get teachers to learn to think about these things in more nuanced ways and not have deficit views of our youth. I think what I'm wondering from your work is, what is the specific history of Germany that makes these interesting in your context? Because I think they're very similar to things we talk about across the world in standardized schools. And so I'm wondering if you can speak more to that, the construction of race and those histories that then inform why these are challenging in, the places that you're working in.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, so my first slide, second slide was the title, Germany is a migration country. And this was actually something that our former Prime Minister Angela Merkel said in 2005. And I'm saying only in 2005 because, people moved to Germany for centuries, of course. If we look at the modern history, immediately after the Second World War, there were many people from Turkey, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece who moved to Germany. But the idea was that, okay, these people will stay here, work for a while, and then go back, right? But actually it was not the case. So people stayed, settled in Germany. Their children were born in Germany. They are Germans, right? So this I think politicians or educational policymakers have really took too many years to realize that, okay, Germany is indeed a migration country. We have, many ethnicities living together since, decades. And so this is one thing. So this is really the late recognition that Germany is a diverse country. About race, there is basically still a trauma, which is linked to the Nazi history. So the term race, it is translated with Rasse in German, and it is indeed linked to Nazi ideology. So if I use race in a questionnaire, basically people can sue me, so I will lose my job. And there are now discussions in the parliaments in these weeks to erase the word race with the idea that if we don't use it, racism disappears. But that's not true. When I talk about race with my students and say, well, wow, why it is important to talk about race and not migration background, I still have some uncomfortable discussions. And still, I'm Italian, so I have also different perspective. I wasn't born in Germany. I raised up in another country. So, but talking to my wife or to my colleagues, and the idea is that, well, we have been always talking about these issues and race and this sense of guilty that we have. And somehow for many Germans, talking about race would mean that you kind of foster this racial hierarchy in a way that if you talk about that, you will once again talk about the past. This might be the issue. But again, the solution is not to use migration background because, as I said, it is highly problematic, this term.
I think we might have time for one more question and a quick one, and I think I'm up. So, and you have a really interesting review paper on pre-service teachers and training programs to try to promote culturally sensitive teaching. And one of your findings was that I think you singled out that experiential learning and service learning might be particularly effective. So could you comment on that and any other aspects of pre-service teaching preparation that you think might be really, that there are hints might be really effective based on your review of a lot of literature?
Yeah, well, basically, I mean, by reviewing the studies, what we saw that indeed the experiential component seems very important. For instance, our university also we try to start as soon as possible sending students to do some practical experience in schools. But we also try to prepare them, because otherwise, just going to teach or to talk to families, if they somehow go with these deficit views in their mind, then these deficit views could also be reinforced in a way. And so we really have to, also work together to first try to challenge these negative views and before sending our students to schools or to basically get in contact with communities. Here in Essen, for instance, we have, the city is very segregated. So in the north part of Essen, we have 95% migrants or individuals with a migration background. In the south is quite the opposite. And so when you send one of our pre-service teachers to these schools, they basically go in another place, in a country, in another country almost. They have never really experienced such schools, because they grew up in very different environment. And this is the challenge. So when we do these kind of experiences, we try to prepare them and to, again, talk about issues such as prejudice, such as stereotypes, discrimination, racism, race. So I think experiential getting experience is very helpful, but at the same time also needs to be very well coordinated with some preparation. So again, the conclusion of my review is really, okay, seems promising, but still we need more evidence. And I think also the studies that I reviewed, many actually, did not report strong evidence, or somehow it was really hard to draw any solid conclusion, because there were some methodological issues there. So again, the experiential component definitely is important, but in combination with more coursework, in combination with discussion around these issues.
I think thank you for that answer. I think, and for answering, it was a great set of questions, and thank you for your answers. And thank you for a terrific talk. It was great. It's one of the virtues of Zoom meetings that it was possible to invite you without you having to get on a plane. This has been really fascinating to hear about your work and to hear about how these issues are being approached in Europe and Germany. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your invitation. And it was also my first invited talk. So exciting, and thank you again for your kind.
Well, I hope that your work makes a lot of inroads in Europe, that you're getting lots of invited talks in the coming years.
Thanks.
So thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you at person at a conference one of these days. And thank you everybody for staying a few minutes late as well.
See everyone, we don't have a brown bag next week, but December 1, we have Grad Fund. We have a presentation by Grad Fund funding for students. So please show up and bring your other students. There are a lot of students that I know are at the GSC and I'm not really seeing on the brown bags, and they're missing out. So please drag your peers. See you all December 1 and have a wonderful holiday. If you're celebrating, bye.
Bye-bye, take care.
Bye, thank you.